Okay, I think we are good to go. And Andrea and Abby, you can see my screen. Okay, I'm going to be honest, guys. I'm working from like three different screens. So if you see me not looking at the camera and looking around, it's because I just want to make sure I'm everything set up all good. But thank you for being here today for our May Lunch and Learn. Can't believe it's already May. But yeah, we're really excited about this topic. This is something I know many of you have approached us about. Again, whether you are just in the beginning phases of talking about hiring staff for your Main Street organizations, or you're actively working towards it. So you're in the interviewing process, or you're about to start putting your job posting out there, or you currently have staff and you want to know, how do I keep my current staff? How do I maybe, take care of them so that we could even grow our staff potentially? Whatever might be the goal, I hope that this can at least be a conversation starter for you. One thing we were talking about earlier is that this is a pretty high level overview because we only have an hour with you. But that being said, I hope that it can be some helpful tools to help you start thinking. And then we actually are wanting to start offering some technical assistance for this as well. So if this is something that you leave today and you're like, we really need some one-on-one guidance, we'd love for your team to come in, we are available to do that. So just reach out to me if you want to talk more about that. We also, and all of us will hit on this, we have a ton of resources around personnel in general. So again, if you leave today and you're like, I need these specific resources, just reach out and I can get those sent to you. So we will go ahead and jump into our agenda. There we go. So again, we're going to start with, I'm going to cover if you are one of those organizations that you're not quite ready to hire anybody yet, but you want to start working towards it, or you already are working towards it. So it might be a 1 to 3 or 4 year goal down the road that you're looking to bring in staff. But I'm going to talk through some of those baseline things to start working towards, so that you can be ready when the time comes. And then Andrea is going to cover if you are searching actively now for that staff person. So really going to be getting into the nitty gritty of that job posting, job description, interviewing, benefits, all those good things. And then Abby is going to kind of close us out talking about, if you actually have the staff, how do you keep them? How do you take care of them? And yeah, hopefully continue to grow the capacity of your organization. So we'll go ahead and start with, again, if you are working towards staff. So again, this might mean that you are not yet at the place where you can hire someone right now. But I do think it's smart to start thinking about it, even if you're like, oh, I don't know if we'll ever be at the place. It might just mean that you need to take a look and say, well, what would it take for us to be able to hire staff? Because I will say, I think most of our Main Street organizations would agree with this, that when they are able to have that additional capacity, it really changes the game of what they can do. Now, that being said, employees they're not a fix all. They're not like, once the employee's on, everything is fine and great. But I do, because it definitely adds a layer of responsibility for the organization. But we have seen that additional capacity really helps move the needle in the community development work that you're trying to do in your downtown. So again, something to start thinking about, even if you think it's a 3-4+ year goal for your organization. So what are some of the focus areas that you need to start thinking about? The ones that I kind of think that are a good starting place is, number one, that financial planning. That is a huge piece, and I'll kind of get into more of what that looks like. But really, it's just preparing your organization financially to actually be able to sustain staff. And that means thinking about things like payroll taxes and benefits and raises, and thinking about that now prepares you and really helps you be more ready when the time comes. Those personnel policies is the next piece that you need to focus on. So the last thing you want to do is be reactive and not have policies in place to take care of your staff. So being able to develop those from the forefront and being really intentional about those, I think that provides that employee a clear support system. They know what they need. You know what your HR policies are. Everything is kind of flowing. That way you're ready. And then lastly, board training. I think before you can even think about bringing any employees into your organization, your board needs to be prepared. They need to have role clarity, and they need to understand what the roles and requirements are to be a working board, even when you do have staff. So those are kind of what I'm going to cover here quickly. So, jumping into that financial planning piece, how can you plan properly to handle having some staff? So, what we want to avoid with this is, again, being more reactive and hiring staff. Maybe when you get, maybe your municipality all of a sudden is going to give you some money, or you come into some money for some whatever reason. So you're like, oh, let's hire staff. But then you didn't really think about that long-term sustainability of that funding, and you didn't maybe again plan financially. So then something happens, maybe that funding from the municipality gets pulled, and then you have to let go of that staff person. That is the last thing we want to happen for your organization, but for your community as well. And ultimately, the employee should never be in a place where they have to fundraise for their own position. So again, you don't want to be at a place where you're like, well, we have to let you go unless you can fundraise your salary. It's like, we don't want that. So that is why doing this financial planning piece on the forefront and really having a sustainable plan is so important. And then again, what we want to achieve is you can use this next however many years of planning to create that plan, secure funding for staff to a point where you don't have to be stressing year to year. Where are we going to get the money to pay for our staff? And also remembering that staff turnover is very expensive for an organization. So whether, again, Andrea and Abby both are going to talk about kind of in their pieces of how that staff care looks, but you don't want constant turnover because you weren't prepared. So really you want to keep that person in there in a stable environment, and then they'll stay for a long time, and you'll be able to have that consistent impact. So let's kind of look at some potential funding streams. I will say this will look different for every single community. There's not necessarily you have to do it this way. These are just some of the typical funding avenues that we see, and hopefully that can be helpful. I would also encourage reach out to other Main Street organizations that have staff and kind of do some digging. How are they sustaining staff year to year? What does that financial kind of breakdown look like for them? Get some best practices as well from them. So the ones that we're seeing a lot, kind of starting out with that city county funding, this is probably one of the most common and hopefully sustainable ways to fund staff. One thing to keep in mind with this is that we all know that leadership changes in communities, budgets can change. So again, even if you're getting some funding from your city to pay for staff, always just make sure that there's money in the budget in case something was to happen. I know we've all been in places where some funding is cut or something happens. So just keep that in mind. But hopefully, if you have a good partnership with your municipality, they see the value in Main Street, them providing you funds that you can use towards staff is only going to be a benefit to them. And it's a great way for them to invest in the downtown through building your capacity. So there's a lot of ways to kind of go about showing them this. And if you need any resources to go to your municipality and kind of ask for that allocated funding, please reach out. We would love to be able to give that to you. And because I know we've had a lot of organizations reach out and say, hey, can how should we use our reinvestment statistics, or what should we kind of pitch to them for them to see that this is a value for us? So yeah, please reach out. But ultimately, again, that's a great way for them to be able to give to your organization. Another piece of this is that we have seen sometimes that the city will kind of bring the employee, they still work for Main Street, they still answer to the board, but they're able to kind of put them under the city so that they can get city benefits. So that's another kind of option to potentially explore. Again, I know this looks different from community to community, but something to think about. Steady organizational income. So really, this is just kind of an overview of really anywhere where you can get that consistent income from. So this is, does your organization own a building and you're receiving rent from that building, for example? Again, these are things you can be thinking about as goals too, financial goals, to think through, okay, we want to have staff. What do we need to financially put in place? Maybe that means working towards acquiring some kind of, income producing entity, like owning a building downtown. Maybe you have really good merchandise sales. Maybe there's something that you sell, that's branded with your downtown logo, and you make a ton of money off of it every year. Things like that that you can kind of depend on that are like bring in that steady income for you. The next kind of biggest one is obviously that those donor campaigns and steady secure donations. So um, every organization, even if you don't end up hiring staff, I would encourage you to have a good fundraising plan in place. And with that, really be thinking through your donor campaign, how you're bringing in your membership or memberships, not the word I want to use, sponsorships. So we tend to call it like Friends of Main Street, but basically people who give to your organization. Um, and so that having a strong donor campaign and a fundraising plan in place is huge because again, even if you get money from your municipality, let's say, or the county, if for some reason that funding got pulled, hopefully you have enough of a sustainable fund in place to be able to say, we're going to be okay. We can keep paying our employee. And so having those consistent donors, that corporate support, really getting them, if getting them to commit, maybe even to giving for 3 years, or getting those kinds of consistent pieces of funding in place. And that can only be done if you actually have a plan. Otherwise, it's just you're kind of going out and trying to get donors and you're not being very strategic about it. It's not very sustainable. You might be still getting some donors to come in and give, but you want to get that consistent fundraising strategy in place. So that's the other really big piece. Typically we say it's not that you can't ever use, again, it's different in every community. I know some of our communities use grant funds to help pay for staff. Maybe they have like a 3-year money they're getting from the community foundation or something like that. But overall, I try to avoid using grant fundings for staff, only because you can't grants aren't guaranteed. You don't know that you're going to get them. So just don't ever plan on it. Again, we don't ever want to lose staff because we assume we're going to get a grant. Event funds, same thing. You can use, if you have a steady event every year that brings in a ton of money for your organization, that's great. It's not that you can't use that money to help pay for staff, but just again, if it's an event that is outside and it gets rained out, really just think through what are the risks. Always make sure there's a backup plan. Ultimately, that's kind of the biggest thing here is like you just always have that sustainable funding in place, even if your big yearly festival that you make a ton of money off of doesn't happen. So anything that isn't guaranteed, just be mindful of that. I definitely want to do a little push again for our Indiana Main Street 2022 income and salary report. And I'll make sure to send this out as a follow-up, but this report is a great place to start. We looked at and surveyed all of our main streets and we compared it with other nonprofits in Indiana and really looked at what are our Main Street directors and staff getting paid? What do their benefits look like? All of those details are in there. And I think that this is a really helpful guide because one thing we want to work on overall is that remembering our Main Streets are economic development organizations in our downtowns, and they play a huge role in the revitalization of our downtown. So because of that, we want our employees to be paid well. And we know that that's, it can be difficult to be able to pay what you would hope to want to pay, especially an executive director. But again, that's why if you're just starting out, plan for that. If you can spend some more time really planning financially and working your way to being able to pay them a really competitive salary, you're only going to get better people in the role if you can, have that really good competitive salary in place. So definitely encourage you to look through this and it kind of help you compare and contrast some things too. Okay, so that next piece is really those personnel policies. So I'll kind of just go into each of these things here now. Okay, so employee handbook. This is something you should be working on developing if you down the road want to have staff. We have some examples. Here's a snapshot from one of our examples, but yeah, these really just go through all of those employee personnel policies that I was talking about earlier. I have been before, talking to directors or staff who are like, oh, I don't really know what our policy is around this or around this. And it's always kind of a red flag to me because as all of us probably have been in jobs before, and it's really helpful to have all of that clearly laid out. You can go and reference it if you're curious about what is my maternity leave, what is my, this or that. It's all kind of in this handbook. And so, yeah, again, we have examples, but definitely work on creating that and creating it in a robust employee handbook, not just something that's like one page, very not detailed. You want it to be detailed. Okay, so the other piece is the org chart and role clarity. If you are going to bring on staff into your organization, you need to be clear about what their role is, who do they answer to. If it's the executive director, it should be the board president. Really make sure that all of those lines of communication are clear. So this is kind of how we typically see it. So kind of the board at the top, the executive director answers to the board, specifically their supervisor is the board president. It's very confusing if they feel like they have 12 different supervisors. So really make sure that president and executive director. And then if your organization brings on additional staff, typically they work under the executive director. And then the committees are kind of there at the bottom working from the board, but the executive director kind of can be a conduit too and help be a communicator in the middle between them. So that's typically kind of how we see it laid out. Again, sometimes there are some different structures depending on your organization, but really just making sure that there's always role clarity. And I'll kind of get into that in a second when I talk about board training. Also job responsibilities. So when you bring on that staff and you're working, and I think Andrea will kind of get into this a little bit more, but just make sure that the responsibilities are very clear. The thing we know that about Main Street staff is that they do a lot of different things. They might have been, they're hired on maybe as an executive director, but that means there's a lot underneath that role. And so the clearer you can be with what those responsibilities are, just so that they have some boundaries put in place so that they're not burning themselves out after a year because they're doing 5,000 different jobs, really being clear, and specifically the board president making sure that they're checking in regularly, all of those good things. So again, I think Andrea and Abby will get into more of that later, but just start working on building out what would those responsibilities look like for our organization from the get-go. One thing we wanted to hit on as well is, do I hire full-time staff or contracted staff? This is something that, again, we know many of our organizations have contracted staff, and then some actually have that employee status. This slide, and then I have a couple slides after this, but this really kind of just goes through the difference between those two. So for example, the independent contractor, they generally kind of direct their own work. They might, again, it might look different from organization to organization. They might still answer to a board president, but ultimately as a contractor, they're kind of their own boss almost. They might set their own hours, maybe hire an assistant. They might be providing their own tools and materials. So maybe they have their own computer if they're a contracted employee. Some things like that. Whereas an employee, they're obviously under the control of the employer. They have those income taxes withheld from pay, maybe work specific hours that are laid out by the employer, potentially will receive pay on an hourly basis or salary. So those are just some of the differences between those two. I kind of grabbed some of this from, and I'll send this article in my follow-up, but Indeed had a good article kind of about what are the benefits and the pros and cons of a contractor versus employee. So I won't get into all of these just because I'll send out that link. And if you have questions about this, I would love to talk more as you're making these decisions, just because I think, we've seen from our perspective kind of sometimes the benefit of having that contracted employee, but also sometimes the cons of it, and the way it can kind of not be beneficial to the organization. So again, some of the things is, that ultimately the employee has to handle those taxes, which I don't think is always great. So, but it does save the organization money. So like that's a piece of it you have to think about. If you're going to have a contracted employee though, they are going to probably want that greater flexibility. So, again, they can kind of work on their own hours, be a little bit more flexible. Some of the cons might be, again, that you have less control over that person, and that they're temporary. Ultimately, I think those contracted employees, sometimes it can feel like maybe they can kind of they could kind of get up and walk away. Whereas if you have that full-time employee in place, there might be a little more stability long term. So it's something to think about. Again, pros of an employee, some company loyalty. Again, they're committed. There's also more streamlined training. Whereas again, you don't want to have a ton of turnover. You want to have someone who's going to be with the organization for a while. We Ultimately, I think we would love to see our organizations have those full-time employees just because we want to see that commitment. And so that the employee doesn't have to also pay those taxes. Again, usually Main Street directors don't get paid very well. So there's a lot of pieces to it. Again, though, we know it's dependent on every organization. We want to see you all have staff. So let's, again, talk to us more about it as you're kind of deciding on which one you're going to go with. Again, these are just some cons of employee, less flexibility sometimes. You do have to, ideally, you would give employee benefits. This is something I know that we'll kind of touch on in a little bit. But ideally, if you do have a full-time employee, you should be trying to get some kind of benefits for them. So yeah. Time off is another thing to start thinking about, I think, on the front end, just because again, this kind of goes into those personnel policies of how are we going to handle this? Will they have flex time? And I know Abby's going to talk about that in a little bit. So again, Main Street directors work a lot of weekends, they work a lot of nights. So they're going to go over most likely whatever hours that you have set for them. So are you going to provide time for them to be able to flex out where they don't have to take personal time and vacation, but because they worked over their allotted amount of hours, they can kind of have that time off? Will sick time, personal time, and vacation be all together, or will it be separated out? Again, do you have a bereavement policy, a maternity leave? All of these things I've kind of from the get-go, start talking to other organizations, talk to us for best practices, kind of be thinking through what do we want that to look like? Again, that way, when the time comes and you're ready to put that job posting out there, all of this is already set because the potential employee is going to probably have some questions about this. And they're going to want to know, what will my vacation time look like, and all those kinds of details. And then how they request time off or lines of communication in general. And I kind of talked about that earlier with the role clarity, but, again, really thinking through every single scenario, what do they need to do if they need to take a day off, or who do they reach out to? Again, probably the board president, but just kind of think through what are those lines of communication for that staff person. Okay, so then lastly, really just make sure your board is trained. So before you even can think about any of those other pieces that I just kind of talked through, your board has to be functioning and has to be already a working board. And also know kind of what their role is with that, because sometimes what we've seen happen is, people are like, great, we hired staff. Now we can kind of just sit back and become kind of an advisory board. But that is not what Main Street is about. A Main Street board, even when their staff is a working, engaged board, just because it's community driven. The work we do has to be driven by our volunteers. So staff is great because they provide that day-to-day, capacity. It's such a benefit to the organization. But if the board just checks out, then that really hurts the organization. And we've seen that, affect the staff, everybody, the community. So really just making sure your board is like, we're ready for the responsibility of having a staff person. We're ready to support them, all of the pieces that fall under having staff. So some ideas to prepare for this, host a board training, and we can provide that for you. So if you want us to kind of come in and again, give your board that overview of, even without staff, here's what it means to be that working board for a Main Street organization. Also, when mapping out that job description, have the whole board really involved in that, at least getting their eyes and stuff on all the personnel policies, just so again, they're clear. Here's what their role is. Their job is not to do everything that we ask them to do. So they have to have boundaries put in place. They have a job description. They know what they're doing. I know what I'm doing. So it's all, again, very clear and cut. So that way there's no tension or down the road conflict or things that feel confusing. And then, yeah, make sure you as a board are making sure that you have a good board member orientation and a volunteer pipeline that's always getting filled, because the reality is that staff will sometimes turn over, whatever might happen, but your board has to be always taken care of. So that kind of also your volunteer recruitment, all of that, make sure that's really steady and strong. That way, when your staff comes in, their job isn't to try to spend half of their time just getting volunteers to get stuff done, because we've seen that happen as well. So make sure you kind of from the get-go have that good volunteer pipeline. All right, well, I will go ahead and pass it over to Andrea. Give me 1 second to try to like, again, move my screen. There we go. Okay. Do you have control, Andrea?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to cover like you're actively searching. And again, a lot of this is going to be just very high level. And we have a lot of resources here to help make this job a lot easier, especially on boards that we know have other jobs. But we want you to go through this process, right? Because a bad hire is really expensive for the organization and can cause a lot of heartache down the road. So the first thing I want to talk about is tips for the job posting and job descriptions. So I think these first three pieces we all kind of know very well, but to use clear and concise language in that job posting and description, clearly stating the qualifications and experiences or in relevant experience, and highlighting the organization's mission and values, I think are really important. But these last three, I think we don't spend a lot of time on now and are really important to putting together a really successful job posting that people want to apply for. So that's selling your community and the quality of life, especially if you're going to be potentially hiring from outside of the community. I think a lot of you guys have communities that, people are willing to move to, if you really sell all of the assets and amenities that you have and the work that your organization does. And then consider using inclusive language to attract a diverse pool of candidates. So we know our usual suspects that are going to apply for this. These are people that have, community and economic development experience. But I think that there are people outside of our typical sectors that have a lot of qualities that would make them great Main Street managers and bring a lot to the role. And then, of course, we want you to avoid discriminatory language and requirements, which we do have a lot of resources related to that. But if you have a lawyer who serves on your board, or even sometimes the city or town attorney is willing to do that as a free service just to support the organization, I would just have them look over that beforehand. Okay. So I think we, again, all know the typical traits to look for in the ideal executive director or Main Street staff person. Those are those people that have experience in community development, knowledge of historic preservation, experience with management or strong leadership skills. But I also want to emphasize the soft skills because there are definitely people out there that make really excellent Main Street managers that you may not expect. I was at one of our coordinating meetings once, and one of the state coordinators for Missouri mentioned that one of her local programs hired a janitor who had worked in a lot of the Main Street buildings downtown. And that wasn't an experience that they thought would be successful, but he had all of the relationships with the business owners and building owners downtown. He knew those buildings inside and out from having been in them, and was just like an excellent candidate who has proven to be just a really great Main Street manager. So I wouldn't strike out anybody just based on their experience alone. So really emphasizing these soft skills, somebody who has the ability to manage both volunteers, resources, needs, and assets, be able to share the load. I think Abby Huff is going to get into this later, but executive directors can't do it all. And we're constantly reminding you guys to share those opportunities, tasks, control, and even the credit across the organization. The ability to build on the organization's vision, the value, the trust that you guys have in your community, and to be able to motivate and inspire by example and be as committed as the volunteers. And then again, attributes trump experience. So authenticity and conviction. These staff members are speaking out about the causes that we believe in, and they do it without alienating people with an opposing viewpoint. I think that's really key. Joy here, you're getting paid to do something that really matters. that makes the world a better place to live in. The work we can do can be hard and sometimes feel like a really steep hill to climb. But this is really a privilege to do this work in our communities. And so the executive director should approach the role with a lot of joy and not anger. And then humor. We know that this work is important and serious, and humor is really important. This can be, we can see a lot of burnout with our executive directors. And so we need an ED who sets the tone that allows for people to excel and just have a big laugh. And then fearlessness as well. There's, a lot to do. There's a lot of people that are involved in Main Street, and having that sense of fearlessness, I think, is really crucial too. Okay, just want to throw out here again, this is going to be sent to you, so you'll always have this as a checklist, but maybe not a typical, our board of directors may not know where the best places to post these job descriptions, but there are job boards on the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which is the parent organization for Main Street America. So a lot of people, especially out of the state, are looking at that job board. There's also the International Downtown Association has a job board. Another one that I didn't mention is like several Indianapolis job boards, I think would be key. LinkedIn, Indeed, Craigslist, local and regional newspapers and magazines. You can send your job postings to us and we put them in our Main Street Monday, as some of you have seen. We don't know if that's been a successful place to really find candidates, but we're willing to do that for you guys. And I would also say other statewide and professional organizations thinking about planning. The American Institute of Planning has a job board. Tourism, preservation, economic development, Chamber of Commerce websites, local colleges and universities, especially the Ball State Historic Preservation Program is a great place to get candidates. And then, of course, posting on your social media. Okay, so we have a lot of potential interview questions ready to go that we can send you when you're at this point. But I also want to just remind you to tailor those to your organization's unique situations and challenges. So I think one of the most important bullet points on this screen is that using behavioral based interview questions to gauge a candidate's past performance and problem solving abilities. So a lot of employers are moving towards interview questions that are situational in nature. Questions like, you've got a chain gas station about to move into town and demolish 7 storefronts. The mayor supports it. How would you approach this problem? So, and also maybe listing what are the first 3 things you would do. So you get kind of more useful insights into how a person approaches the work and how they think about problem solving more than just the traditional tell us about yourself kind of interview questions. I also want to emphasize that the candidate or the committee that is going to be doing the interviews, really refresh yourself on hiring best practices to avoid both internal biases as well as not asking illegal questions. So we do have some resources related to that we're happy to send them. But, and I think another piece that's important when you're doing this interview is that last bullet point, providing candidates with a clear understanding of the organization's culture and work environment. Maybe appoint somebody on the committee to that's really passionate about the work that you do and can explain that well, so that, not only are you interviewing candidates, but they're also interviewing you in a lot of instances, that this is a place that they're wanting to invest their time and effort and skills into. I think we sometimes take advantage of that from time to time, and it's important to know that, you're recruiting just as much as they're trying to get the job that you're offering. Okay. So again, I'll just briefly go over this so that Abby Huff has a lot more time and detail related to this, but we really want you guys to offer competitive salaries and benefit packages that align with the organization's values and missions. Raise the salary for staff before hiring staff. So don't make the new executive director raise their own salary because it's not this is what you can do right now, and you're hopeful that in 6 months you'll be able to raise that. I think that's really on you guys to create an environment that sets your executive director up to approach the job not from a place of stressing about whether they're going to get that raise in 6 months based on what kind of relationships they created from starting the job. I don't think that's not a great place to start your executive director in. And then really hire the person who fits the community and that you look forward to working with for years to come. So again, I've kind of mentioned this several times, but it's really important to spend a lot of time on interviewing and doing a really thorough job of this. If you don't find that person through your first round of interviews, pause and then restart the search process. It's really better to be patient and find the right person than hire the wrong person. And then we're going to send these out, but these nice boxes here at the top that I'm kind of pointing to there, that's a link that you can click on when you do get this. So I would highly encourage you to go there, but also the state of Indiana has a great resource as well for organizations when they're hiring, and it does break it down to, even if you're a nonprofit, what pieces do you need? So I'm not going to go into this, but once you get that person hired, you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row. It also just makes you guys look like you guys have your stuff together when you know what you need to do on all of this. When you're bringing on your first employee, maybe have somebody on the committee that has experience doing this, maybe for their own business, so that you set them up for, that their taxes are being taken out correctly. Okay, and so this is, I just took a quick screenshot, but we do have even more than this. You can see those IRS questions, a 1099 versus a W-2, 10 questions for hiring your executive director, second interview questions, search committee, what to include in a transition binder. So just tons of resources that make your job a lot easier when you're hiring. Okay, and then this box here is also a link. This is a really great resource for a lot of things, but especially for hiring. This is a nonprofit toolkit link from the Central Indiana Community Foundation that just has a lot of really great links related to, may employees also volunteer for your organization? The answer is no. Do I have to pay overtime? Reducing unconscious bias in recruiting and hiring, free HR resources, and how to grow your organization for small nonprofits. So just a ton of additional reading, and just wanted to point that out as an additional resource beyond just us. So.
Sorry, I'm trying to. We'll get there.
I was like turning it over to
you. There we go. Okay, do you have control now, Abby?
Yes. All right, so good. I guess we're in the afternoon now. So I'm gonna kind of talk to you guys about, so you've hired that perfect person for the job. Now what? How do you keep them? So prior to 2020, the executive director turnover for Main Streets was about 2 years. And that has probably gotten shorter since the pandemic. And when you think about that, it takes a person, an individual, about a year to learn their job, and then a year to start putting it into place. So really, you only get a year of really good practices put into place with your hired staff, and then all of a sudden you're doing that process again. So I just kind of want to talk to you a little bit about how to retain your executive directors. Oops, wrong way. All right, so let's start off with the problem. So Main Street America, this was done, I think, in 2017, so it's a little dated, but they did a kind of a poll on why directors left. And so from their poll, 100% left because inadequate salaries. So that's really something you guys need to think about, and we'll get into that a little bit. 60% was from burnout. 40% was lack of support from staff, and 40% was lack of vacation or personal time. And so, really, when you look at the comparison, this was this right side here was actually done by Main Street, Iowa, where they did a interview of all directors and board presidents. Again, about that 2018 timeframe, but 89% of board presidents perceived that directors' jobs could be done either always or sometimes within paid hours, while 57% of executive directors felt that directors' jobs could be done always or sometimes within paid hours. So that's quite the gap between what staff perceives and what board presidents perceive. And most of that overload or work overload was really came down to either not enough volunteers or not enough volunteers who committed to what they would say. So let's kind of talk about that solution. So it takes a village. You'll always hear us saying this, organizations, collaboration. So Main Street organizations, or even the staff, shouldn't be doing everything alone. You need to kind of change your mindset that this is a group effort, a team effort, a community effort, a village effort. So it really does take these kind of 3 buckets, as I'm going to put them in. So local organizations, which consists of your executive director and your staff, your board of directors and your volunteers. It's your community, which is the city, and also your larger community. So maybe not those directly involved. And then your other Main Street organizations. So Indiana Main Street, us, and then Main Street America. So I kind of want to walk through with you guys kind of what everybody should be kind of looking at, working at. So Main Street director and staff, one thing you should be doing is keeping a list of kind of your successes throughout the year. And we hope you're doing that either through work planning, or you're doing that through, just, hey, this was a success, something I did that was successful. I want to make sure I'm mentioning that to the board. Make sure you're a vital part of that budgeting process if you're not already. So really make sure you have a seat at the table. The board isn't deciding the budget and then telling you what the budget is. You're really involved in it. You're working towards a cohesive budget every year. Also, just a reminder, your budget should either break even or be in the green. Use your Main Street success list for why you deserve a raise. So if you've gone years without a raise or it's been a while, really make sure you're keeping track of that so that you can be an advocate for yourself and talk about why you deserve that raise. And then reference communities around you for their pay and benefit. So again, go back to that salary and funding survey we did, but then also look at what the chamber director in your area is getting paid, economic development director, or your city administrator, because these people are all on the same page as you. They're all economic development directors in some form or capacity. So you should be getting paid directly in line with them. Also make sure you're not just looking locally, but also regionally. And remember, it's okay to speak up for yourself if you're feeling overwhelmed by your job duties or what you're doing. Don't suffer in silence. Your board president should be that person that you could go to. You trust them. If you don't, go to the vice president. Find someone who is an advocate for you on your board. So board and volunteers. So the first thing is work on budgeting by thinking it as the activity, the event, the person, so your staff, what are they worth? And not how much they cost. And make sure you're including a raise for your staff. Even if you're like, maybe they're still learning, make sure you're still giving them like a 2% raise, but budget for a 5% raise. Just look in that, it does kind of, when you're going towards review time and you say, great, you did awesome, have a great year, and there's no benefit, that sometimes can put a staff person down. Again, know those comparable salaries to the Chamber, Economic Development, and City Admin, because these are the colleagues of your director. Make fundraiser a major focus and responsibility for the board. So fundraising, again, was hit on already, but it really should be a board effort. Directors and staff should not be fundraising for their salaries. Make sure you're attending events and be involved in your committees. So as a board person, you should all sit on a committee. If that's one of the traditional 4 committees or executive committee, or we know some organizations have a like a marketing committee, make sure you're participating. Also make sure you're showing up to those events that you are doing. Introducing yourself. One thing when I was a director, I always did is made sure my board members had name tags. So when they were at events, they were wearing those board member name tags. So people knew, oh, hey, they're part of the organization. They can come up and talk about, hey, I want to get involved. They know who you are. So make sure you're identifying yourself at these events. If you've got time, help out your staff. Maybe take some time in the office where you're just stuffing envelopes or filling goodie bags. That takes some of that work off the director or the staff, where they can be looking at and working on one of those 4 points: economic vitality, promotions, design, anything, where it kind of takes that nitty gritty stuff off their plate so they can start looking at the whole picture. Make sure you're recognizing and thanking your directors. As you saw, burnout is a big part of it, and just saying thank you sometimes helps. And make sure you're advocating for your director. So let's talk a little bit about some employee benefits. So the first one that we hear a lot from communities is, oh yeah, we do not provide health insurance because we're a one-man show and we can't get health insurance. There are some ways you can. So the first is to provide an extra stipend per paycheck to assist with paying their healthcare premium. So one of the things, and this is no way a promotion, but make sure you look at its small business health options programs. And these are really like single payer, if I'm a self-employed or a staff of one, there's a lot of ideas on how you can get health insurance. The other thing is a health reimbursement arrangement. So maybe the employer is paying into an employee's HRA, and that HRA the employee can use for stipends, for their healthcare expenses or other things. This is also untaxed. Ask for the city if you can make them, just the director, a part of the city package for making them an employee so that they can really work towards having those benefits that the city has. They're doing a lot for the city usually, and so just making that case. We do have some communities here in Indiana that do have their Main Street executive director as city staff. And then again, just research that single insurer programs. Education. So make sure you are budgeting education for your employees outside of what we're requiring at Indiana Main Street. So some things that you can look into is the Main Street America Institute, the Lilly Family School of wow, it's very hard to say. You know that word. And then the Indiana Community Development Course. So those are just some examples. Helping your staff people gain experience makes them believe that you've invested in them and they want to hang around a little more. So time, allow employees to flex or compensate for their time. So if they are working nights and weekends, maybe it's okay for them to take Monday off. Don't expect your employees to be available 24/7. Really work on that work-life balance. It's a big thing, especially since COVID. Employees are leaving and going to jobs where they do have work-life balance. Also, don't expect your executive director to be in the office Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. If they're sitting at a desk waiting for people to walk in, they aren't out on the street. They aren't talking to investors. They're not talking to investors. So don't expect to have a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 office. And then support their need for time away. Again, if an employee is coming to you and talking about, hey, I'm feeling a little burnt out, I just need some time away, make sure you're supporting them through that. So this is vacation and paid holidays. So this was part of our salary survey that we did last fall. And the lines in yellow are overall Indiana nonprofits, and the lines in blue are Indiana Main Streets. So you can see a lot of days that maybe Indiana nonprofits have, but Indiana Main Streets don't. And we do understand, like, especially this line that's like the day after Thanksgiving. A lot of Main Street directors are probably working, getting ready for Shop Small Saturday, but make sure you're allowing them to take off time in the next week to kind of catch their breath, take some downtime, and really take a look at this list and see how you can add those paid days off for your directors and staff. So, as I said, it takes a village. So the first is city. So really work with your cities, your municipalities on how they can assist with that funding gap or benefits cooperation. Your city and your county should be investors in your organization because you are doing a lot for the city. Um, we've heard in some communities that the Main Street organization is the economic development organization. So really look at that. Make sure you're working really closely with your city. Make sure you have a city member who's on your board as an ex officio so that they know that these discussions are happening. Also ask the city to provide some services so what we call that in kind. So if they are doing barricades, police protection, so on and so forth, you need that help. An example of how this doesn't work is the city gives an organization money, but then the organization now has to pay the city back for those services. It's kind of a in and out of the same pocket. Um, so really look at working with your city, make a case, make sure you have a memorandum of understanding set up with your city. And that memorandum of understanding should be looked at yearly, if not bi-yearly. This also protects you. We're in a mayor cycle, so a lot of communities are looking at maybe new mayors coming in. So it kind of protects your organization too if you set up an MOU so a city mayor doesn't come in and just completely gut your budget. And then your larger organizations or larger community, make sure you're getting out the word to them that there's events, that you're doing some positive things, and that they should really be supporting you and asking for those support. Make sure to always ask for that support. And then have positive interactions with them. Um, if somebody's coming to you and they're kind of upset with what you did, stay positive. Make sure they're staying positive. Really just be positive. All right, so Indiana Main Street and Okra. Obviously, we want to be there for you, and this is kind of what we say our responsibility to your organizations is. So we're a champion for executive directors at the local level. If you're a director and you feel like you need some support, do not hesitate to reach out. Never be afraid to pick up the phone and call us. We will, if it's a conversation where you just need to vent, we will not go to your board president and say, so and so called us and they're really upset with you. We understand that sometimes you just need to have some private conversations. And if it's just you and you don't feel like you have that support, we can be that support. We will use accreditation to hold conversations with boards about the need for adequate compensation, support, and engagement for your directors. We will follow up with the board of directors, both to see if the conversation is continuing and working towards a resolution. And we will utilize your directors as speakers, consultants, etc., to help you gain and develop recognition for your work. So I know we've got a few directors coming to executive director training this week to mentor our younger executive directors. So we look forward to that. And we've used some of you for lunch and learns. And, hey, reach out to us if you say, hey, I've got this idea, I would love to present. Let us know. We want to help you gain experience. Okay, and lastly, if you're a member of Main Street America, make sure you're using their resources. So all of our accredited and our Indiana accredited and nationally accredited communities can sign up as Main Street America communities, and they get all of these benefits. So the big ones are make sure you're using the point. This is an interactive with communities, not just in Indiana, but all over the country. You get discounts. You get their online resource center. Their online resource center is great if you've not dug into that. They have webinars. They have a digital library. Again, that preservation job board, your licensing agreements so you can use their logos, and then the discounts for registration rates. Really make sure you're using it. You're paying for it, so you're using it. And Indiana Main Street also, we have a yearly contract with Main Street America. So, Jackie just came to Lebanon's community exchange. So that's through our contract with them. So with that, looks like we got about 4 minutes left. So Willie can take any questions.
Feel free to throw them in the chat, or I tried to make sure everyone had access to their microphone. So you can also unmute if you would prefer.
Hi, this is Courtney from Develop New Albany. Obviously in New Albany. I guess our situation maybe, and I don't know if it's unique, I just know what it is. So we've had staff for a few years, and when I first started on the board, our only staff was like contracted, like it was contracted to handle like our finances. So we do not have an executive director currently. We have like a program coordinator, and we're working on kind of evolving all of these pieces. But we have always really been volunteer led versus being staff led. So are you all suggesting that maybe that's not the best route to take, or?
I'm just waiting to see if Andrea or Abby, if you want to, okay. I can kind of start and then I figure it all. Yeah, no, Abby, please feel free to, yeah, I think so ultimately what Main Street is, and kind of what, going back to even my slides when I was talking about kind of building that foundation, ultimately, we want it to be community and volunteer driven. That's what the organization is all about. So yeah, for sure, having that engaged board of directors that's kind of driving it, I think that is totally wonderful. I think the next piece of it is just when you are able to bring on that staff, because the reality is that obviously boards, because you all, probably work full-time jobs and or maybe have other responsibilities, the staff is able to kind of bring in and add some of that capacity beyond kind of, again, those day-to-day logistics, because I think the board is really those visionaries are kind of laying out the plans, the direction, and then the staff's able to actually go out and help do that. And so, yeah, I think that's wonderful. Abby, I'm curious if you want to add in any other thoughts. That's kind of, or Andrea, whoever.
I just wanted to add that the
Yeah.
only requirement for staffing is at that nationally accredited level, and that's one full-time equivalency. So there is a chance that it could be, 2 part-time staff that equals 40 hours per week. But the only level that we require staffing right now is at that nationally accredited level. But if that's not the goal, that Indiana accredited Main Street level has all of those same accreditation standards outside of the full-time staff and the transformation strategy pieces. So it's still, we keep that level very high to recognize the work that our organizations are doing, even when they don't have paid staff.
I know too, when So I started off as a director in Iowa, and I think it was like 2015. Iowa did make the requirement, and we haven't done this, but made the requirement that all um, program those paid staff people who are in charge of the program have that either director or executive director title, basically for the community. It's a kind of a people see that title as executive director, and it makes them more, I don't know, legitimized. Also, you do have to realize that if you aren't paying a competitive salary, that your directors aren't going to stick around for long, and maybe you're giving them a boost on, hey, they had that title, hey, I was an executive director. So when it is time for them to look for something new, move forward in their career, they have a title on their resume.
Question. Any others? I know Jennifer asked about the average salary. I will send that salary survey out in the follow-up, and that has kind of even breakdown by like levels, like what we're seeing the average salary are for our main streets, but then also what in general for nonprofits across Indiana. It breaks it down that so you can see that comparison. What else? I guess we're at 1 o'clock, so I want to be mindful of time, but is there any other last minute questions? If you have specific scenarios, kind of like what Courtney was just talking about, if there's something where you're like, okay, kind of here's the situation we're in, reach out to us. Again, we'd love to kind of process that with you, talk through some, again, best practices around that. But yeah. Okay. I'm not hearing anything and I'm not seeing anything. So we will go ahead and wrap up for today. Please, again, email us, call us, let us know if you need anything. Okay, so Lexi just said, we're currently doing the contract position thing. Is it okay to move forward to an employee situation once it fits better? To hope to move forward to an employee situation once it fits better. Yeah, I mean, I think like definitely, if what your organization can do right now is the contracted position, and then they want to start kind of, again, financially planning, working towards once maybe there's some more stability there, then they can shift you into the full-time employee situation. I think that's great. And if they need any, again, resources or help, reach out and we can kind of get this information to them. What is the percent of main streets that fund a director with funding from the city and town? I think that information's in the salary report as well. So that I will send that out because I can't remember from the top of my head. There's quite a few, I would say, overall, that, or at least they use that funding that's allocated from the city towards salary for staff. But yeah, I'll be able to have that. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we're hoping to do that report more in the future so we can continue to capture these numbers because we know things change and adjust over time. So, okay, anything else? All right, well then I will go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you again, everyone, for being here, and I will send a follow-up email with the presentation. This will go on YouTube, all those good things. So have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.